Hello, welcome back to another lesson for Unit 9, Social Psychology. This lesson is on person perception and close relationships. What we're going to be looking at is the process of forming impressions of other people and how we make judgments and classifications off of that, as well as the factors that determine your close relationships. So let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, the effects of physical appearance are often heavily in favor of those who are attractive. People who are attractive are often seen as more sociable and more friendly, having warmer personalities, and are more well-adjusted people, despite the fact that there's little actual correlation to support this. Also, people who are more physically attractive are seen as more competent and receive better jobs and pay as a result, and there's a modest correlation for that. When it comes to your first impressions, we can form them rather quickly and rather accurately. There's a lot of factors you could assess when you walk into a room and you look around. You could give someone a firm handshake or a very weak handshake, and as a result, form an impression off of that. This is a survey that was done, a job outlook survey from 2006, and basically what was asked of employers is to rate the qualities of certain characteristics on the influence of being hired or not. So you have no influence, slight influence, and strong influence. Some of the categories here relate to things such as grooming, non-traditional interview attire. You know, if you showed up into a job interview wearing a blue tuxedo, that might not be the best course of action, although I would say it does depend on the job that you're applying for. Other things could include non-traditional hair colors, unusual hairstyles, obvious tattoos. For example, if you have a tattoo on your face or maybe on your neck that's very visible, maybe on your hands, very visible, this could have an impact on your chance of employment. Other categories include things such as facial hair or body piercings. So you can take a look at this and kind of go over those results. So one of the things that happens is humans are kind of lazy, and we often make stereotypes about people, typically because it saves us time and effort. And unfortunately, what it does is it leads to often inaccurate perceptions. But you can see some of the most commonly categorized stereotypes here based on gender, age, ethnicity, and occupation. There are some reasons for why stereotypes exist and why we often feel our stereotypes are accurate. Usually it's based on confirmations. We also feel that there's a greater likelihood to confirm our stereotypes than there would be to unconfirm a stereotype. And so you have to be very careful, of course, when you use a stereotype because, like I said, it does frequently lead to an inaccurate perception. But we use them because we're lazy and we would rather not necessarily get to know someone. Here's a quick graph. It's meant to be humorous, of course, but also pointing out, sadly, some stereotypes that people have about Americans based on state. So again, I'm not here to tell you that these are true or false, but just simply showing you when people outside of the United States were surveyed, these were some things that they came up with. So take it for what you will. Problem with stereotypes is that we tend to believe we see them confirmed, like I said, more than we see disconfirmations. And so there's a name for this. It's called the illusory correlation. And basically, we see kind of what we expect, especially in regards to ambiguous behavior. So we have a certain recall of information when we see it, and we think, oh yeah, this is exactly what I held as my belief anyways, and then here you know I'm seeing it. So the illusory correlation often is the explanation for why we feel we confirm our stereotypes rather than when we don't confirm them. So you can see in this meme here about a bunch of police officers at Donut Land, there's this long-standing trope about cops loving donuts and whatnot. And the reality is that anyone out there could love donuts or not. But if you see a cop car, a police officer at a donut shop or at a Krispy Kreme or whatever similar type of place, what is that going to do? It's going to confirm your stereotype. If you saw a police officer eating a healthy salad, that's not something that's really going to be memorable for you because you've never had a stereotype about police officers eating salads. Another slightly connected idea here is known as the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is when we have an assumption that when we walk into a room, there's some kind of social spotlight that's cast on ourselves, and that it's shining a lot brighter than it actually is. And so we have usually an inflated sense of self and ego here. We think that everyone's looking at us when in reality, no one may be looking at us. So something to think about. From an evolutionary perspective, when it comes to person perception, one of the reasons this is important to think about is that the way that you approach other people, both who are part of your friend circle, your friend group, people that you care about, and people who you necessarily don't care about, as bad as that sounds, we have a kind of a classification for them. And so the classification is basically just simply, are you in my in-group or are you not? If you're not in my in-group, then you belong to the out-group. We tend to be very favorable towards our in-group. This is known as an in-group bias. And we tend to kind of have somewhat of a negative attitude towards people who do not belong in our in-group and instead belong to the out-group. And so when someone is not in our out-group, we essentially may not treat them with the same sense of empathy that we may have for someone in the in-group or our friend circle. And this is very normal. This happens, I would say, quite often. But people who are in your in-group are going to be people who you feel you have more of a cohesive bond with. It could be people that you're grouping by culture, by race, by language spoken, by geographic proximity. It could be education level, social status. There's a wide range of factors. Your peer groups at school, if you want to technically label all the types of people in a school. In the past, some of my students have just named kind of the cliques of the school. So if you wanted to say the nerds and the jocks, or the theater kids, or the band geeks, or whatever have you, you may belong to multiple in-groups. You may belong to only one in-group, or you may find yourself sometimes in an in-group and in an out-group with other peers. So, not ragging on any groups, of course, just trying to give you some ideas and some perspective about what an in-group or an out-group could be. So as we move forward and look at some of the factors of close relationships and tie it into person perception, think about some of these ideas, one of which is called overconfidence. We are actually very much suffering from something called the overconfidence effect or overconfidence bias. And what that is a tendency to overestimate how accurate our judgments are. In fact, we often are pretty inaccurate when it comes to certain statistical measures of deciding about probability of events or how likely to estimate something happening would be. And so this is something that you should be aware of course. Another idea is belief perseverance. Belief perseverance, as you can read, says our tendency to maintain a belief even after the evidence we use to form the belief is contradicted. So basically what it means is that if somebody gave you some evidence to go against a widely held belief that you hold, rather than saying, oh, well, now that I've seen that evidence, I guess I was wrong, instead of being rational and doing that, you instead would double down on your original belief. So I'll give you a quick example. I once heard a story. The famous astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, he was talking about a situation where this guy kept trolling him and responding to him on Twitter, talking about the moon landings not being real, and there's no actual evidence that we were ever on the moon, and just all the time he would engage Neil and basically talk about the conspiracies of moon landings. Well, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, what he said was he finally responds to the guy and says, what is it going to take for you to believe that the moon landings are not a hoax and they're in fact real? And the guy actually responded and said, I want to see some photographic evidence, some proof. So Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a pretty connected guy, I would assume, as an astrophysicist. And he's able to access photographs through NASA or some other platform to basically show the shadows on the moon from the impressions of the rovers and whatnot that landed there. So he takes all this kind of evidence to this guy who's been trolling him on Twitter, and what does the guy do? He doubles down and says, you know what, those photos are probably photoshopped, or those photos are fake. And so this is a perfect example of belief perseverance. Okay, now for part 2 of the lesson, it's on close relationships, how we form relationships to people that we like and people that we love. And so typically you can shorten this by discussing interpersonal attraction, which is positive feelings towards another. We're talking about like, friendship, admiration, lust, and love. Most of this part of the lesson can be summed up in just this one slide, so bear with me for a few minutes, but some of the key factors in attraction are going to be number one, physical attractiveness. Of course, everybody would love to say they're physically attracted to their significant other or their spouse. We tend to seek out physical attraction, and we tend to even pursue other people in dating who we feel match our level of physical attraction. This is why you may see commonly among celebrity culture someone who's considered very widely attractive ending up with someone else who's considered very widely attractive. It's because of the matching hypothesis. Within us, we have this desire to seek out a physical attraction with another person, and we're likely to select someone that matches our own perceived level of attractiveness. But this is not the only factor. Of course, there's many others, such as proximity. If you live in the middle of nowhere, your potential selection for a mate or significant other is going to be somewhat reduced by those around you because, again, you live in the middle of nowhere. So unless you're willing to pursue a relationship maybe via the internet and go from there, the actual proximity of people around you would be pretty sparse, as opposed to if you lived in a major city, a very urbanized environment. Suddenly now your population density is a lot stronger, and as a result, there are more people nearby. With that being said, it's worth noting of a phenomenon called the mere exposure effect, which is basically the more often you're exposed to something, the more pleasing and likable that something becomes. This can apply to both products as well as people. And so someone who is a new student who joins your class, for example, could catch your eye, but over time, they may catch your eye even more as you continue to see them, or somebody that you keep bumping into in your social environment. Suddenly they become more and more attractive because you've seen them more and more. Advertisers also take advantage of this to try to show you advertisements that will eventually be more and more enticing the longer that you continue watching or the more often that you see them. Among those who are dating or in relationships, you also find among those couples similarity of attitudes and personalities. This is not uncommon. It's known as attitude alignment. And you see this when you have dating partners who gradually modify their attitudes in ways that make them more congruent or more similar. And so when one person kind of becomes very similar in attitude to their significant other, this would be a strong case for attitude alignment. But people tend to pursue those who, again, would help them form a cohesive group as a couple based on a variety of factors. So it's more common to find people of similar age who pursue one another, people of same race, religion, social class, education, intelligence, physical attractiveness, values, attitudes, and many other things. So just keep those in mind. Another task for key factors in attraction would be reciprocity. As a child, you may find out of a childhood crush. And what do you do when you find out about that childhood crush? You begin to torment that person. Why are you tormenting them? Because you actually like them. It's a defense mechanism of, hopefully you remember. I'm drawing a blank on the moment, so I don't even know why I brought that one up. But the defense mechanism where you act opposite of how you truly feel. Okay, reaction formation is actually the name. And that is sometimes connected here to reciprocity. If you find out as a kid someone has a crush on you, you may suddenly realize, hey, I like that person too. Why? Only because you heard it first. So the last thing I'll say about the factors of attraction for romantic partners is that people typically set a bar, they set a standard for what they want and what they're looking for. And they want to find that special someone who lives up to that ideal person that they've imagined. Luckily, we live in a time where you can easily raise or lower your bar. And so if you can't find someone who matches this ideal potential other that you're looking for, then you lower your bar. If you have too many people who are interested, maybe you raise your bar and become more exclusive. So when it comes to the types of love, you have two major examples. One, passionate love, and two, companionate love. One of these is a love where you have complete absorption in another person that includes the tender sexual feelings and the agony and ecstasy of the intense emotional highs and lows. Companionate love, however, develops as more of a warm and trusting love where you begin to have another person's life who's deeply intertwined with your own. Passionate love versus companionate love, or maybe you develop both. You may recall in a previous unit a lesson on attachment styles of children, and that same research has also been applied to adults. We have adults who may find a secure attachment in terms of their relationships, or an avoidant attachment, or an anxious ambivalent attachment. Of course, you guys can read so you can see these, but they match up quite nicely with the attachments of children. Adults who have secure attachments have no problem getting close to other people. They tend to trust when it comes to love relations, and they have the fewest divorces among couples. Whereas others may find themselves with more of an avoidant or anxious ambivalent type of attachment, which could mean developing trust or getting close to others could become very challenging. Here's again another way of referencing those, and I'll just let you see this for 1 second. You can pause if you'd like to read them. Around the world, it is pretty common to find many similarities among what people are actually truly looking for in a mate. People value very similar qualities such as a mutual physical attraction. They value kindness and intelligence, stability and dependability, as well as good health in other people. With that being said, these are all factors that are going to vary among the dating pool. And so while a lot of cultures place an emphasis on these qualities in love and marriage, some of the cultures around the world reach this love in different ways. Of course, there are still arranged marriages around the world. Arranged marriages, while maybe foreign to those in America, actually have very high success rates among the relationship because there's such an emphasis on the marriage in itself and the family. And members who are in an arranged marriage may not want to disappoint either family or give up on this relationship as easily as those who are supposedly developing a relationship purely out of love. We tend to see in the collectivist societies, which is in more of the Asian hemisphere, the Eastern hemisphere or the Asian countries, where you may find a collectivist view. You may see more of an arranged marriage there versus in the more westernized individualistic cultures, like in the United States, for example, where we have marriages for love. You may also be surprised to learn that the internet and relationships are often connected in a fairly successful way. Today, the chances of someone developing a relationship on the internet and having a success with that is about as successful as those who start a relationship first in person. So I found that surprising when I learned it. Maybe you'll find that surprising as well. And finally, just looking at the evolutionary perspective on attraction, where has it came from? Well, traditionally, the argument has focused on someone's reproductive potential. I'm sure you're surprised to hear that, but good looks historically was associated with youthfulness and fertility, and those are both associated with reproductive potential. So that's what people were traditionally looking for. However, in some cultures, facial symmetry has been a key indicator or element of attraction, believing to be that a facial symmetry is a sign with better health and genes, whereas an asymmetrical face would serve as a marker for someone who's in bad or poorer health or has bad genes. The women's waist-to-hip ratio has also come into play, as it is expected that overall men preferred lower waist-to-hip ratios worldwide because it was associated with more reproductive potential. When you look at the gender differences in mating preferences today, when you look at men versus women, men and women in the short term have pretty similar preferences. Both desire physical attractiveness or physical attraction to their potential significant other. But women also value things such as social stability and emotional stability, as well as intelligence, whereas men typically have placed a larger value on physical attraction. Anything else I want to say here? Honestly, no, you guys can read the rest and it should be fine. And so that's going to conclude the lesson on close relationships, love, as well as person perception. As always, peace out.